Welcome, friends, to another exciting episode of A VGM Journey. And I'm your host, The Messenger. The track that we're playing into today's show is Stage Select from the game Puzznic, and it was composed by Tim Follin. I know it's been a little bit since the last episode, and I hope that you guys could find it in your hearts to forgive me when I play some really cool video game music for you guys. So let's just kick things off with our next track, which is coming from the game Fallout 3. The track is Unwelcome Guest, and it was composed by Inon. That track that you just heard, that was Unwelcome Guest from the game Fallout 3, and it was composed by Inon. Fallout 3 was one of my favorite games from the Xbox 360, PS3 era of gaming, and I recently decided to replay through the game, and I gotta say, the game still holds up in a lot of ways. I mean, yeah, some aspects kind of aged, and I think most Fallout fans would say that New Vegas was a better game. One thing that really hit me, though, when I was replaying this was how good the score was. And to be honest, way back in 2008, 2009, in that time span, I didn't really care too much for orchestral video game music scores, as I felt as though it just didn't really hold as much as like the 8-bit, 16-bit chiptune type stuff. But it's something that's definitely grown on me over the years, and I now have an appreciation for the kind of music that was being composed at that time. And this specific track, it is one of the combat theme in the game, and I like that right away it incorporates the Fallout theme into it. And it definitely drives home the fact that there's a lot at stake as you're navigating through all the dangers and just the actual horrible stuff that is going around in this nuclear apocalypse as you try to find your father in the nuclear ruins of Washington, D.C., that's just been renamed the Capital Wasteland. I think even some of the more moodier songs really fits the game well, and I think it's worth a listen. I decided for this next track, we're just going to pull a 180 and go from just absolute hell to absolute heavenly music, and that I want to play this song from Rayman. The track is Harmony, and this was composed by Remi Gazel. That track that you just heard, that was Harmony from the game Rayman. It was composed by Remi Gazel. Just recently, the 30th anniversary of this game and the series was celebrated, with even a new game being teased, though much information wasn't really talked about for it. And though I have more experience with the games that came out after it, this original game is still a lot of fun to play. And the soundtrack by Remi Gazel, it is really fantastic. It's definitely a game that I need to take a stab at again. We're going to move on to something quite a bit different, and this is coming from the game Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters, specifically the Sega Genesis version of the game. And the track is Filet's Stage, and it was composed by Miki Higashino. That track that you just heard, that was Filet's stage from the game Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters, and this was composed by Miki Higashino. This track was so good, and it always makes me think that a lot of Konami's Sega Genesis soundtracks, I feel as though they're pretty underrated, at least compared to all their NES and SNES stuff, and they always seem to really hit it with their Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles soundtracks. And though I think the NES and SNES soundtracks for this game are pretty good, the Genesis soundtrack really just kicks my ass in a good way. Just a whole lot of bangers on the soundtrack, including this track. And though I can admit that I really have no idea who Filet is, they definitely got a really good track. We're going to move on to our next track, and this one's coming from the game Power Drift. The track is Side Street, and this was composed by Hiroshi Kawaguchi. That track that you just heard, that was Side Street from the game Power Drift, and it was composed by Hiroshi Kawaguchi. And that's going to just about do it for the show today. If you like what you've been listening to, have your friends check out the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, maybe, if the show hasn't been taken down yet. We're also on YouTube and Terra Players, the home of various different video game and video game music podcasts. You can email the show at vgmjourney@yahoo.com, and you could also check us out on both X and Blue Sky at vgmjourney. We also have a Discord server for the show, which I'll provide a link for that in the show notes, where you could hang out with your fellow VGM journeymen and talk about games, music, and even look at some cool art. We're also going to play things out with one more track, and that's going to be the staff roll from Super Bomberman 3, and that was composed by Jun Chikuma. Have a good one, everyone.